Hi everyone, welcome into another episode of Matt Sports Talk, and in this video we are going to be, it's going to look a little bit different as we are, of course, we have the updated ARC numbers coming out this afternoon. I don't know if I'll get to recording a video later this afternoon. It depends on when I see that uploaded. And if I do not see it uploaded later this afternoon, then I'll be recording a video for sure coming up tomorrow, going over all of that. And then, of course, recapping all of the games in the terms of the Crossroads League for men and the women tomorrow night. And that'll all be coming your way tomorrow night, or not tomorrow night, but coming your way on Thursday, recapping all the games from tomorrow night, because there is a lot on the line in terms of playoff seeding. So again, make sure you stay tuned for all of that. And if you are brand new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button down below so you're first notified whenever I upload new episodes. And I truly appreciate any feedback that you may provide me. And I mentioned this yesterday. This is the place to be here on my YouTube channel over the next month and a half, because we have the selection show Thursday coming up in just a couple of weeks, and then, of course, the opening rounds of National Tournament the week after that. And then, of course, all things National Tournament, recapping all the National Tournament games in terms of the Crossroads League schools that make it. And then, of course, giving you daily updates on my National Tournament bracket that I will print out, fill out, and follow along throughout the whole entire tournament. I'll be sharing updates regarding that with you after each individual round to see how I'm doing. This is my second year and that I will be filling out a bracket, so I'm really excited about that. And then, of course, after the National Tournament game has been completed, or the National Championship game rather has been completed, then I'll record a final video for this season, for Season 2 of Matt Sports Talk. I'll be recording a final video kind of wrapping up the season and talking about the Crossroads League in terms of the men and the women. I'll be doing a season recap video of all of that, talking about where the teams finished, where they were projected to be in preseason from the league, and where I had them projected. So again, that will be coming your way toward the very end of March, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. And then, of course, I will also be this is going to be the place to be in the month of March for National Tournament. Of course, I'll do the same thing on the women's side, doing a season recap of that. So again, I'm really excited about it, and of course I will be posting all of these videos moving forward under Matt Sports Talk Season 2 playlist, so for 2025/26 season. So in case you have missed any episodes, you can go back and catch up on all of them, at least the ones that I have posted over the course of the last couple of months, and then moving forward, the rest over the next month and a half, when things are really going to start ramping up in terms of National Tournament. I will be, of course, I'll be posting all those videos under that playlist, so you can easily catch up in case you have missed anything. And again, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so, because this is the meat of the season, so to speak, where I get more and more excited because we're getting closer and closer to the National Tournament, which teams will be in. And obviously the league tournaments start next week, or literally next Tuesday night for the women, and of course next Wednesday night for the men. So it's definitely going to be a lot of fun. Now, I wanted to do things, at least for this video, and again, I mentioned off the top, I don't know if the updated ARC numbers are going to be out this afternoon or not. If they are not posted later this afternoon, I'll be recording a video tomorrow going over the updated ARC numbers. But for this particular episode, I wanted to do things a little bit different and go over, or not really go over, but explain the National Tournament seeding to you, at least what I know so far, just off of my own research regarding how the selection show committee seeds all of these teams into the National Tournament. And of course, I know I mentioned that in the NAIA, so that's what we're going to be looking at in this video. We are going to be looking at all four of the quadrants in the National Tournament. And I have an example on my iPad, well, not an example, but I have last year's total National Tournament bracket on my iPad, talking about where all the teams were seeded last year. So again, that way that as you're watching this, you have a better understanding of where all the teams were seeded and all that good stuff. So let's dive in now. We're going to start in the Naismith quadrant. This is the #1 quadrant. So again, if you're brand new to this like I was last year and you don't understand all the quadrants, what all that means, how they seed teams into those specific quadrants. That's why I am here today to explain that to you. And of course, this is my second year in doing this. So again, I'm still fairly new to this. So again, I'm still learning a little bit. But the Naismith quadrant, and of course, you always keep learning every single day, right? So that's never a bad thing. It's always a good thing when you keep learning new things. So in the Naismith quadrant, that is the number one quadrant that the selection show committee seeds teams into. And meaning that the number one overall seed is placed in the Naismith quadrant. Now, last year that happened to be Dordt out of Iowa, the Dordt Defenders, and I really expect them to be the number one overall seed again this year. They only have one loss right now, that coming to Doane, the first go around in the regular season at Doane. So that, again, that I fully expect Dordt to be the number one overall seed again this year. And so going off of last year, they were the number one overall seed because they were 29-2 going into the tournament. And so when you're filling out a bracket, so for example, if this is your very first year and filling out a bracket to follow along throughout the whole tournament, like I was last year, then this definitely is a good course, so to speak, to learn and be able to understand a lot better, so that when the national tournament comes, you're following along, you say, okay, you might be like, oh, well, why is this particular team in this quadrant when they have a better record than, for example, this other team over in the other quadrant? Well, that's why I'm here to explain all of that to you. So, in other words, now again, the teams that, the number one seed, there are 4 number one seeds that go into a national tournament. Your number one overall seed is placed in the Naismith quadrant. Then, more than likely, your second number one seed is placed in the Kramer quadrant. Your third number one seed, more than likely, and again, I apologize if this is not correct, but I know for sure the Naismith quadrant is the number one overall seed. Your third number one seed is placed in the Dewar quadrant, and your fourth number one seed is placed in the Liston quadrant. So we look at last year's national tournament. So when you're filling all this out, so let's say maybe you're filling out a bracket at home, maybe you're printing out the bracket for this year, and maybe you're writing in, maybe you're writing down notes on that. Let's say at the top of the paper, to where you're writing down, okay, here are the 4 number one overall seeds. Here's roughly the 4 quadrants that they are placed in. For sure, the number one overall seed is in the Naismith quadrant. And so when you look at that, from last year, you had Dordt that was placed in the number one overall seed in the Naismith quadrant. They advanced to the national championship game and ended up winning, beating Indiana Wesleyan. Then your second number one seed last year was Bethel out of Tennessee. They were placed in the Kramer quadrant, and they advanced to the Final Four before losing to Dordt in the Final Four round. Then in your Dewar quadrant, you had Campbellsville. Campbellsville was your third number one seed last year, and they advanced to the Sweet 16 round before losing to Governor State out of Illinois, out of a CCAC conference. And then Indiana Wesleyan was the fourth number one seed last year, and they were in the Liston quadrant, and they advanced to the national championship game before falling to Dordt. So that's how the number one seeds break down. Now we are going to get to the number two seeds. So your number two seeds last year were Freed-Hardman out of Tennessee, you had Cumberland's out of Kentucky, and you had Southern Oregon out of Oregon. Now Southern Oregon was undefeated last year. So meaning that, again, I don't know this 100%, but I would guess that Southern Oregon was basically that Southern Oregon was the first number two seed last year. It would make sense because they were undefeated. And then more than likely your second number two seed last year would have been Freed-Hardman. And your third number one, you're probably, if you just based off the quadrants, basically the Cumberlands they were a 2 seed, they were in the Naismith, so they actually were the number 2 overall seed last year. And then Southern Oregon would have been the second number 2 seed out of the Kramer. And then the only other number 2 seed was Freed-Hardman, and they were placed in the Liston quadrant. So basically Freed-Hardman was the third number 2 seed last year. And then your 3 seeds last year were Briar Cliff out of Iowa. They were in the Dewar quadrant. and you had St. Francis out of Indiana. They were your number 3 seed in the Liston. Your number 3 seed was Marion in the Naismith, and your number 3 seed was William Carey in the Kramer. So I think that when we look at this, I think Marion was the number 3 overall seed in the Naismith quadrant. Your second number 3 seed would have been William Carey. Again, if any of this information is incorrect outside of the Naismith quadrant, I apologize. But I think that your number 3, your number one of your basically your third number 3 seed would have been Briarcliff, and your fourth number 3 seed I think would have been St. Francis out of Indiana. So, but again, that again, if that's not correct, I apologize. At least outside of Naismith quadrant. And then of course you get to your number 4 seeds. Your number 4 seed was Langston and Naismith. So basically, Langston was your first number 4 seed. Your second number 4 seed would have been Hastings out of Nebraska and the Kramer. Your third number 4 seed would have been Dakota State. And Dakota State, I believe, was in the North Star last year. They did away with the North Star. Now they put Dakota State, I believe, in the Frontier, in the Frontier Conference. And then your final number 4 seed would have been Georgetown in the Liston quadrant last year. And then obviously, you can kind of do the math with your first number 5 seed, your 5th overall seed would have been Dakota Wesleyan last year. Then your second number 5 seed was LSU Shreveport in the Kramer. Your third number 5 seed would have been Governor State in the Dewar, and your fifth number 5 seed would have been Providence out of Montana in the Liston. And then obviously you get the idea. It would go down from there. You'd have your first number 6 seed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way down the line. So that's kind of an in-depth look of in terms of the teams seeded in a national tournament. Now remember that when the selection show committee selects teams to be in, the very first team, of course, there's 64 teams that get in. There's 34 automatic bids, and then 30 at-large bids, and then that equals your 64 teams. When you look at that, your number 1 overall seed is the very first team picked to be in. Your first overall number 2 seed is the second team that gets picked. Your very first third seed is the third team picked to be in. Your first number 4 seed is the I stand corrected. Your number 1 overall seed is the first team picked. Your second number 1 seed is the second team picked to be in. Your third number 1 seed is the third team to be picked, and then your fourth number 1 seed would be the fourth team, and literally in order 1, 2, 3, 4. Your first team last year that would have been picked to be in would have been Dordt because they were the number 1 overall seed. Your second team, the second team overall to be picked in the national tournament last year would have been Bethel out of Tennessee. Your third team to be picked, basically your third team to pick to be in would have been Campbellsville, and your fourth team in would have been Indiana Wesleyan, and then your fifth team in order would have been Cumberland's. Your sixth team to be in would have been Southern Oregon. Your seventh team to be in would have been Mid-America Nazarene out of Kansas, and then your fifth team to be picked to be in would have been Freed-Hardeman out of Tennessee, et cetera, all the way down the line. You get the idea. You can do the math. I'm not a good math major, or I'm not a good math person, but hopefully you are, so you get the idea. So that's a breakdown of how the teams are seeded to be in the national tournament, and how all that works with in terms of your quadrants, with your number 1 overall seed being in the Naismith, your second number 1 seed being in the Kramer, your third number 1 seed being in the Dewar, and your fifth number 1 seed being in the Liston. So that's a breakdown of that. So when you are looking at your bracket for this year's national tournament, and again, after each individual round, you can keep you get the idea. You can follow along with whatever team you are rooting for, and hopefully this really helped you in having a better understanding of how that's done. Now, as I end this video, I will say that in the Naismith quadrant, whoever is the number 16 seed, and again, I learned this based on watching other videos, which again, that's how I learned. Your 16th, whoever your overall number 16 seed is in the Naismith quadrant, that is the very last team picked to be in the national tournament. Last year, that was Haskell out of Kansas. They were 13-13 last year. However, they won their conference tournament, so therefore they got an automatic bid into the big dance, and therefore, because they were the number 16 overall seed, they got that means they were the very last team to be picked to be in. So basically, they were the 64th team picked to be in the national tournament. Then your number 15 overall seed last year was Eastern Oregon, so that means they were the 63rd team picked to be in the national tournament out of 64. And you had St. Xavier out of Illinois. They were your number 14 overall seed in the NAISMIP, so that means that St. Xavier would have been your 62nd team out of 64 picked to be in the national tournament. And your number 13 seed was Blue Mountain Christian. They won the Southern States. So basically, they were the 61st team out of 64 picked to be in the national tournament last year. And then you had your number 12 seed was the Masters out of California. So they basically were your 60th team picked to be in the national tournament. So you break that down, your last 4 teams in that were selected to be in the national tournament last year, your final 4 team, your last 4 in would have been the Masters out of California, the Blue Mountain Christian out of the Southern States. They're located in Mississippi. Then you would have had the Masters would have been the last 4 in would have been the Masters, Blue Mountain Christian, as well as then St. Xavier, then Eastern Oregon, and then Haskell Indian Nation out of Kansas. Those would have been your last 4 teams in last year's national tournament. So again, and then of course Loyola out of Louisiana, or Milligan out of Tennessee, they were the 11th overall seed, so they were the 59th team picked to be in the national tournament, and Loyola out of Louisiana, that's number 10 overall seed in Naismith, so they would have been your 58th team to be in the national tournament. So basically, when you look at the Naismith quadrant, whoever is 10th through 16th, that basically is your 58 to 64 in exact order of the teams that were picked to be in the national tournament. 58th to 64th, whoever the number 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 seeds are in the Naismith quadrant, that's how all that would break down. And then, of course, in your Kramer quadrant, you would have, again, basically in this quadrant, you would have your 50th to 58th, or your 50th to 57th, rather, teams picked in that order to be in the national tournament, which would have been Carroll out of Montana, then Southeastern out of Florida, then Huntington out of Indiana, College of the Ozarks, Missouri, then Lindsey Wilson out of Kentucky, then UC Merced out of California, and then Sterling out of Kansas. So again, there's your 50 to 57 in terms of exact order and teams being picked into a national tournament, and then therefore they're seated in that order in the respective 4 quadrants. So then you would go over to the Dewar quadrant, and it would have been your 43 to 49 in terms of your seed. Your seeds here, your 43 to 49 would have been Northwestern out of Iowa. Then you would have had Columbia out of Missouri, then Arizona Christian, then Montana Tech, then Spring Arbor out of Michigan, then Kansas Wesleyan, and then Lourdes out of Ohio. So again, there's your in terms of at-large bids only, and or a couple of auto bids, that's how all that would break down. And then in your listing quadrant, same thing. You would have had your 35 to 42, again, in terms of not just a couple of auto bids thrown in there, but also your at-large bids, your 36 to 42 would, in terms of teams picked in that order, 36 to 42nd to be in the national tournament. You would have had IU Northwest, Indiana, Stillman out of Alabama, College of Idaho, out of Idaho, obviously, Jamestown out of North Dakota. Jamestown's no longer in the NAIA, at least I'm pretty sure. And then you would have had Indiana Tech, obviously out of Indiana, then Johnson out of Tennessee, and Philander Smith out of Arkansas. So that is a breakdown of how all these teams are pretty much seeded into a national tournament, because again, you have 34 auto bids, you also have 30 at-large bids. So again, including your 34 auto bids and your 30 at-large bids, that's the breakdown of how teams would have been seeded in exact order into the national tournament. So again, I hope this was really, really helpful to you as you prepare for the national tournament. Maybe you're in the process of filling out a bracket, or you will fill out a bracket. I hope that this very detailed breakdown was very helpful to you, or you found it informative. And if that was the case, please either like this video, comment, or subscribe. Any one of those options helps me out greatly. And again, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Matt Sports Talk. And of course, we have the updated ARC numbers. Those should be out later this afternoon. If I don't get around to recording a video today, I definitely will record one tomorrow going over those numbers with you. So again, make sure that you stay tuned for that. Of course, tomorrow night we have a ton of exciting games in the Crossroads League. A lot of playoff seeding is on the line. So again, make sure that you stay tuned for that recap video, which will be coming your way on Thursday. Thanks so much for tuning into this video. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.